Something insane is happening in Florida.
Their golden years are gone.
Tell me how they're raising their prices so much.
Home prices are surging, and the number of homes available is really low.
Miami has the most competitive rental market in the nation, where 21 people are looking at every single apartment that becomes available. I found a study that ranks all US states, and Florida ranked as having the best economy in the nation above Texas and North Carolina. It took them decades of economic growth before their GDP reached $1 trillion in 2017. But in a couple of years after that, it ballooned to $1.7 trillion. So why doesn't it feel that way?
My landlord just raised our rent from $1,800 a month to $3,000 a month.
How do you increase rent by $600 a month?
Living in Florida has become increasingly difficult, and housing is a big part of this. This is a list of how much rents and wages have increased over the years. Miami saw the highest rent increases, with over 50%, and moderate wage increases of around 20%.
The industry feeling the greatest impact of rising inflation is the housing market here in Central Florida.
This is Florida's housing crisis with hindsight.
South Florida is the tightest rental market in the nation.
A crucial new report showing the U.S. economy shrinking for the first time in 3 years.
What initially got me interested in this story is that Florida is often painted as the canary in the coal mine for the US as a whole. See how home prices have increased in the US and Florida. In 2008 in Florida, they increased faster and they plunged deeper. And see the similarities with what's happening right now. This doesn't mean that it will happen again, but this same pattern was visible right before market crashes in the 20th century. Like during the Great Depression, when home prices rose faster and then plunged deeper. So let's entertain the thought. Let's look first at some of the previous boom and bust cycles before going in depth about what is happening today. In the 1900s, Florida's economy was relatively underdeveloped, and the state had only about 500,000 residents. Much of their land was seen as worthless swampland, and most people worked as farmers. But that changed in the 1920s. They built new railway connections from Jacksonville to Miami, and even extending to the Key West. This didn't just facilitate tourism, it helped with the growth of export-led industries. Suddenly, Florida became a hot investment opportunity. All along this railroad, developers sold these lands to mostly out-of-state residents. Many lots were bought to be flipped for profit, and that's when Miami started to grow. In 1910, their population stood at 5,000 people. Over the next 20 years, it had grown to 110,000. But the excitement was toning down when some investors realized that they had bought worthless land and that property values were wildly exaggerated. These are home prices in Miami. It suddenly spiked, but this was also happening at a national level, but more moderately. And then home prices fell sharply. The economic crisis in Florida started in 1926, 3 years before the Wall Street crash of 1929, which marked the beginning of the Great Depression. But Florida, since then, changed. The state used to rely heavily on agriculture and tourism, but they diversified. In the 1950s, the US had drastically increased its defense spending in Florida. Air conditioning had now become widely accessible, and Florida's population started growing fast. This quick population growth kicked off, and it never stopped. In Central Florida, Walt Disney transformed the job market, and Miami and Fort Lauderdale became the world capital of the cruise industry. But Florida is much more than tourism and defense. Miami has a large Hispanic community. In 1980, already more than half of Miami residents was Hispanic, and 19% was white. The city would transform itself into the financial, cultural, and trade hub for Latin America, and statewide, Florida was pushing pro-business policies, getting rid of state income tax and regulations, helping attract businesses and wealthy individuals. Florida built a large and diversified economy, but even so, in the 2000s, we saw that same trend happening again. Home prices suddenly spiked in Florida, and it was more extreme than in a national average. And when they dropped, it was deeper. And if we look at these figures today, we see a similar trend. So let's break down what is going on now. Florida is amongst the fastest growing states in the country. In key economic indicators like population growth, job growth, and real GDP growth, Florida consistently outpaces the national average. But this comes at a price.
If you can work remotely, why not do so in Florida?
Everyone's got the same idea. They want to come to Florida.
Florida has low taxes and warm weather. When many people started working remotely during the pandemic, the state became a popular destination for immigrants.
Which cities are home to most self-employed workers? Florida dominated the list of the top 10 cities.
There are major outliers between states. Most people left California, New York, and Illinois, and most domestic immigrants went to just a handful of states, mostly Texas and Florida, which saw a net migration of 370,000 people in 2022. This didn't go by unnoticed.
The salaries here just don't add up to the cost of living here.
Some worry the influx of newcomers can put a strain on the housing market.
Here's the problem. Florida's population growth over the past 3 years has consistently outpaced the number of new homes that were built. Add demand without adding supply, and prices naturally go up.
There seems to be no shelter from the storm of rising rents.
My current rent is $3,050.
My rent and utilities is about $2,400 a month.
In most of Florida's big cities, like Miami and Orlando, the average rents suddenly increased with double digits. In Miami, it jumped in 1 year from $1,500 to $1,800 per month. But it's not just that rents increased. Over time, the number of affordable homes that were available on the market fell drastically. In 2013, these were the number of rental units by asking price. Today, the 3 lowest priced categories all saw the number of available units drastically decrease, particularly units priced between $600 and $1,000 per month. While homes that cost over $1,400 became more prevalent, and the biggest increase was for homes that cost over $2,000 per month. It was a perfect storm. More domestic and international migration added demand. Well, not enough homes were built. Together with lax regulation, this helped push home prices of the available housing stock, while companies didn't increase their wages accordingly. And this didn't just affect rentals. That's what this graph is based on. The cost of homes available on the market for sale jumped by 43% in just the 2 years between 2021 and 2023. And that's the average for the entire state. In big cities and in popular neighborhoods, it was even more. So many of these factors, like a fast population growth and rising home prices, were early warning signs of a market crash in the 1920s and 2008. But there are also many differences.
This was Hurricane Milton. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through.
Florida has a troubled geography.
Homeowners are getting crushed with rising insurance costs.
Florida's average annual premium nearly triples the national average, and those rates are even higher here in South Florida.
The state is low-lying and prone to hurricanes. Nearly half of Floridians have reported hurricane damage, and this makes it expensive to get insurance. But more than that, it makes insurance companies greedy. Over the past decade or so, the amount that Americans pay for all types of insurance has increased by 75%. These companies are profiting from natural disasters, which in Florida have always been extreme. It has become particularly expensive to insure your home. Nationwide, the average homeowner's insurance has increased to about $1,400, but in Florida, you can expect to pay about $2,500. This is not something that everybody can afford, and to provide options to people with the lowest incomes, the state has its own insurance, which is often called the insurer of last resort. The number of people having to use this insurance more than doubled since 2020. This is an indication that insurance is getting too expensive for too many people, and this is a risk factor that wasn't as prominent in the 1920s or in 2008. The problem with historical determinism, the idea that history will repeat itself, is that it assumes that history follows strict laws, like physics, and that outcomes are inevitable. So it completely ignores context and it is oversimplified. And Mark Twain is credited to first have said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. It provides us with analogies to recognize patterns, and many of the patterns that we're recognizing today are similar to those of boom and bust cycles in the past, but the context today is completely different. In the 1920s, Florida's economy wasn't as well diversified. It relied mostly on tourism and real estate, but now 22 Fortune 500 companies have their headquarters in Florida. They are leading in sectors like finance, logistics, aerospace, and healthcare, and they're sometimes even ranked as having the best economy in the biggest economy in the world. Another key difference is Florida's population growth. Whereas Florida is growing incredibly fast right now, most of this comes from migration, and the type of migration today is very different than in the past. More than half of immigrants to Florida move from within the United States. They're often highly educated and work remotely, and many come to Florida for its tax advantages. This helps stimulate the local economy, whereas in the early 20th century, migration was much more speculative. If the market is going to crash, it will be different from times in the past. Thank you for watching this video all the way towards the end, and I hope that it gave you some value. If you want to help me reach a larger audience, please consider writing a short comment, liking this video, and subscribe to my channel. YouTube actually tells me that videos with more positive engagement are pushed to a wider audience. Thanks again for watching, and if you want more, here are 2 more videos for you to consider for your next watch.